I'm Judy Gelman Myers with New Jewish Cinema for Jewish Broadcasting Service, and I'm here with Alon Schwarz, the director of a fascinating film called AIDA'S Secret.
You could trust her with anything.
She was always very kind and very sweet. She never hurt anybody.
We could feel that she was very secret. She didn't want to talk. Just a few words. I was on the war. I have a son in Israel.
יש לי משפחה נהדרת, אישה מקסימה, 3 ילדים.
Yitzhak's brother is alive and living in Canada.
אני לא מאמין.
I've always believed I was alone. It will mean so much more to me if she looks at me and says, Shepsel, I missed you. I don't know if that's gonna happen.
Mommy, that's my brother. Your 2 sons.
So we are together. We are together. I want to ask you a question. Do you remember anything about what happened to me?
No, I don't. Sorry.
When a mother births a child, they cannot forget that they birthed a child.
Yesterday.
אחרי מלחמה, אז באו לברגן-בלזן מהסביבה.
There was sports, there was entertainment, there was a sex life, there was everything. For them, it was the start of a new life.
Was I my father's child? Was I adopted? I've got some pictures, Mommy.
That's Grisha.
Grisha. That seemed to have been the love of her life.
His tattoo. This guy doesn't have it. Who is this gentleman?
זה כמו תיבת שקרים ושדות.
I think she knows what's going on.
It was terrible war, but I did the best thing I could for him. And then I lost him for a long time.
You remember?
Remember.
Hi.
Hi.
Alon, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, about the characters in this amazing story, and how you are connected to them.
Okay, so actually this story for me started over 40 years ago. I was a little child playing in the garden of my aunt and uncle's in their village, and this old lady comes up to me and says, you know, Uncle Isaac has a blind brother. And I was a kid, I was really young, I didn't know what it meant, but I understood that was a secret. And the moment this lady turns around, I ran to my grandfather, who lived also on the same lot, and asked him about it. And his reaction was traumatic. He caught me by my shoulders, shook me, and said, do you know what a secret is? And I said, yes. And he said, this is a big secret. You can never tell this to anybody, including not to your parents. And I held this secret about my Uncle Isaac for 40 years, actually. And then
40
years, 40. And a couple of years ago, 4 years ago, when I visited them, Isaac approached me. You know, we were sitting in the living room, and he says, you know, I came back from this tour with my granddaughter. They have these tours for high school kids to go into the Polish concentration camps. And he was very touched by this whole tour, and he decided to investigate his past. Isaac was brought to Israel after the war as an orphan, and he never really investigated his past. He met his biological mother, Ida, at some point, but he didn't know much about anything. All he knew about his father is that his name was Grisha, and he died in the war. That's what his biological mother told him. And suddenly he finds, after coming back from this tour, they go and they find 4 certificates, and these are certificates from the DP, from the Displaced Person Camp era, after the war. And suddenly he understands that he had a brother or a sister. He found a certificate for himself, for his mother, Ida, for his father, Grisha, and one more on the name Shepsel, with the same parents and the same family name. And he's telling me this story, and I'm sitting on his couch, and his wife is next to him. and I became white. I was shaking because I knew the secret and I hid it for a very long time. My heart was beating, I had sweat on my hands, and finally I told him, listen, Yitzhak, I know this story, I heard it when I was a really young kid outside in the garden. And he wouldn't believe me, he thought I was kidding him or something. And finally when he understood this is true, his reaction was like rage, not rage, but anger, I would say. He told me to go home, get out of his house. And from the car, I called his daughter, my cousin, and I told her, Effie, send me over all the names that you know. I want to start researching this. Because I felt very, very guilty, obviously. And that's how it started. And that's, and I didn't know anything about the brother except that he existed. And that night I didn't sleep. I was sitting on the web and looking and searching and etc. I stumbled across a site of a company called MyHeritage that do genealogy online. And finally, one of the things I did is I wrote them an email, and that's how the process with them started. And to make a long story short, after a couple of weeks, they were able to locate the brother who turned out to be alive, indeed blind, and live in Winnipeg in Canada. His name is Shep Shell today. So that's in a nutshell, how it started.
אתה מתוח נורא, אלון, אל תהיה מתוח. אתה נורא מתוח, אלון.
ככה, זה אימיילים ששלח לי החוקר.
Yes.
Hi, Alon. I just wanted to drop you a quick email to let you know that I have been successful in contacting a tree owner, Melanie Shell. Melanie has confirmed that Gregory Shevelevich was her grandfather. She replied back to say that her father was aware that he had an older brother. הוא יודע שהיה לו אח, כן, and a birth mother who had gone to Canada, but that he had lost contact with his mother in the 1950s. Yitzhak's brother is alive and living in Canada. She mentioned that her father is visually impaired.
No. איך הוא יכיר אותי?
הוא יכיר אותך. הוא יכיר אותך. זה האח שלך הקטן.
הוא עיוור עדיין, הוא נולד עיוור באמת.
מלאני.
אתה ידעת את זה. אתה ידעת את זה, לא, אני לא.
So the first part of the research was really a manhunt, looking for the father and looking for this brother. So I was living in archives. So MyHeritage were helping with the online research, but I was researching in a couple of different areas and places. We were in Argentina, looking at graves and a lot of dead ends in Australia, looking all over the world. It's hard to locate two refugees that were last documented in a displaced person camp after the war in Germany and disappeared. But once we found Shep, or MyHeritage found Shep, it turned into a research of finding out what the story was, because we were able to find him and they met and it was very exciting and we filmed that. But then we understood that we had a film on our hands, a cinematic film, and that's when we started looking to understand what is the story, who's the real father. We had a lot of question marks, and what happened to the parents there. We knew that Aida and the mother and the father Grisha were together and then separated. And we also knew that each of the family members left the camp on a different date. And we tried to understand what the heck happened there. And that was the film research. And one of the interesting things is that at one point we were able to find an album, a thick album in Amsterdam, in a place called the NIOD, which is in Amsterdam. And we found over 1,000 pictures that a woman by the name of Zippy Orlin gathered together. And shockingly, it had a lot of the pictures from the DP era and also the pictures of this unknown figure of which we knew was the father, Grisha Shevalevich. So I was looking through the album, and suddenly it all came to life for me. I started understanding that after the war, this was a totally different story in Europe. People came out of the war, were getting healthier and getting better, and then they started wanting to have a life. And it was an amazing rebound to life, and I understood at one point that this is part of the story as well. Not only the reunion, but the historical aspect of telling this unknown story of life after war. Then it developed more because at one point we were able to find films that were shot there by the Joint. This we found in America. And when we were sitting in the editing room, the amazing thing is that not only did we have the father in those films and in the photos of the album from Amsterdam, we also were able to cut a scene of the daily life in the camp, and we found photos that were taken on the set and that were found in the album that were taken on the set of the films that were shot. And there's a scene, or two scenes in the movie, where I'm looking through an album, and suddenly everything comes to light out of the photos, and people don't understand how we did it.
Scene.
But 70 years after, we found still photos that were shot on the set of these movies, and our characters are in it. So that's pretty amazing, I think. It's like winning the lottery to do a documentary and find all this.
So when you mention a DP camp, it was in fact Bergen-Belsen.
Yeah, it was.
I had no idea that Bergen-Belsen was a DP camp after the war, and I think a lot of other people don't. Can you talk about life in the DP camp, and especially the role that Grisha played in that?
Yeah.
Grisha the father.
Yeah, I had no idea what a DP camp was. I grew up in Israel. This is a story not told in the narrative that they teach everybody in Israel. I mean, for us, there was the Holocaust, there were the horrors, and then they come to Israel, and they dance hora in the kibbutz. That was pretty much. And when you go into research, I understood that there's a 3 to 5 year period where these refugees, Jewish and not Jewish, were living in these camps. There were over 220 camps all over Germany and Austria and Italy that housed these refugees that had nowhere to go. And Bergen-Belsen was one of the biggest camps. And what was fascinating to me was to see the explosion of life that was happening at these camps. These people were psychologically devastated, were physically very sick. But after a couple of weeks and months, these people had a democracy, had democratic elections, had a football, a soccer league, had concerts, had a theater, and it was like a community that was exploding. And they had a lot of sex too. So a lot of babies were born. Actually, it's a world record of birth after a year in Bergen-Belsen. From 6,000 survivors, 1,300 babies are born. Yeah. So when I saw all this and I understood that our 2 brothers were born in that camp, and that the parents were this couple in this crazy after-war party, kind of.
Well, there are those fabulous dance scenes.
Yeah. So for me, that was shocking, and I have to say, in Israel, when the film came out, it was part of the big success was that this was a story that nobody knew. It's an untold story, and for me, it was fascinating. So it's like kind of a detective story, where we have archives and everything, but it's not a Holocaust movie at all. It's on the contrary, it's the untold story of the explosion of life after the war.
Right.
And for me, that was fascinating. That I understood at one point that we have this crazy reunion of 2 brothers and a mother after 70 years. This detective story, finding out who the father was and what happened between him and the mother, and then it ties into a historical story that's a totally untold story. So for me, that was very exciting.
Yeah,
at one point.
it's fascinating. Can you talk about Grisha?
Yeah.
Who, Isaac's father? So
Grisha was a Jew from Poland who got sent to the Russian army at some point, fought the Nazis as a tank soldier in a tank, got caught by the Nazis, was sent to a couple of different concentration camps, and at the end of the war is liberated in Bergen-Belsen. And he's a very talented guy. He's very well connected. He becomes the head of the transportation department in the DP camp. And you have to understand, that was a very big job, because transportation department were in charge of all the food supplies coming in and all the people going out. So he's a super powerful guy, and there's a huge black market after the war, which he's involved in.
And he's like a very sexy guy with lots of women.
Yeah,
he was really something.
He was, yeah, you know, the general attitude in that camp was, if you were interested, you would meet people. They didn't call it speed dates, but they actually had these kind of speed dates where they would go in, a couple of men, a couple of women, meet up and go out together. So there was this whole phenomenon of people that were left without a family, young people, that wanted to create a new life and create new life. And he was part of it, and he was a super powerful guy. And he had a lot of women that he knew in the camp. The first one was Ida, but then there were more. I don't want to spoil the film. But it's a super interesting, not very conventional story about post-war.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Can you talk about Ida herself? She's in many ways, she was not, when we finally encounter her in the film, she was not what I expected at all.
Ida, Polish woman, born as a Catholic. When she was young, her and all the teenagers around her from Poland, from her city, she was born in Lodz, in Łódź, got taken away for slave labor in Germany. The Jews they sent for extermination, the non-Jews they sent to be slaves. So she was very pretty. She found herself as a domestic worker in a Nazi woman's house. We don't know what she went through, but we have reason to believe she was also abused there by some Nazi men, officers in the army. Anyway, she comes out of this period alive and well, but mentally hurt. And she, like many others, she says the Americans came and they told them, okay, if you don't have where to go to a camp. And she walks to Bergen-Belsen.
She walks to Bergen-Belsen.
And she ends up in Bergen-Belsen. That's where she meets Grisha. In Bergen-Belsen, it's not only Jews. We tend to think it was a Jewish club. No, it was a lot of Jews, 6,000 Jews, but then there were also non-Jews. And this camp, the concentration camp gets burned down, and they take over the German army's base, which was right next to it, and they put a hospital in it, good hospital, and there's food, a lot of food, and the conditions are very good in the camp after a couple of weeks. So people actually want to come into the camp. That's where Ida ends up. She meets Grisha, and she really moves from the Polish bloc living area to the Jewish living area. They separated the people by, the Jews were all together, and then there was a building for each nationality. So she moves from the Polish side to the Jewish side. She becomes a couple with Grisha. She's registered as a Jew. We don't have the official conversion papers, but we do think she did convert at some point. And they have a family, and towards everybody, they have 2 kids, Isaac and Shep. I don't want to spoil the film, but there's questions there. And at some point, we knew they got separated because, as I said, Isaac gets sent to Israel, then Ida leaves for Canada, then Grisha lives for Canada. He goes to Winnipeg, she goes to Montreal. And then Shep, we didn't know how, gets to Canada as well. So there was this whole mystery. But again, I don't want to give too much away, but it was just a super interesting thing to kind of understand what happened there to them. And given the historical context and a lot of witnesses and documentation we found, we managed to figure out a lot of it.
So, in fact, Ida sent Yitzhak to Palestine.
Yep.
Why did she do that?
That's a great question. Let's go into the mental state. Okay, this is our analysis. We don't have a absolute document that indicates it. But she's a young new Jewish girl, and she is exposed to all the propaganda that's available to the Jewish people in the camp. And what these people are reading on their newspapers in the camp that are printing and hearing is that Israel, the state to be Israel, is a utopian place, utopia. There's a very, very large Zionist, I don't know what the word, Zionist propaganda from all the Zionist parties trying to have these people come to Israel, although Israel is closed. It's not Israel yet. It's still under the British mandate. But they want these people to stay and come to Israel when it's opened. And suddenly there's an opportunity to send Isaac with a bunch of orphans that the British did let in. So orphans were coming in before Israel was a state. It's still, and
What year was this?
1947, 48. So what she does is basically she believes it's a great place to be. There's food in Israel, there's sunshine, there's vegetables. These orphans are going to kibbutz or moshav, and she puts him with the orphans. And since she's a very connected person, because Grisha is very connected, they're able to do this, send Isaac over, and she's sure that they will follow him when the gates open. The only thing she didn't know that they would shortly after get separated, and then the state of Israel would question if she's a Jew or not a Jew, etc. And she wasn't able to follow him. But that's what we think is her mental state. And she really thought, and I believe her, that she thought that the best place for Isaac would be Israel.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I found really fascinating was the way each of them responded differently to finding the family. Ida was sort of almost nonchalant about it. For Sheps, it was really an existential issue.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
First of all, I think you're right in your observation. I think Shep, his background, he's blind, and he didn't have a very warm connection with his biological father and his wife Margaret, who raised him in Winnipeg. So for Shep, it was always a question of who my mother was, and when he found out he had a brother, who my brother is. And he didn't even have a name for his mother. He knew nothing. He was literally in the dark, as you said. So when we reached out to him, he was super excited. He was very afraid of what would happen when he met Isaac. What would happen when he met Ida? He was afraid to be let down. He was afraid they wouldn't want to be in touch with him. He had all these issues of abandonment. Being abandoned, because he felt he was abandoned by his mother, and then he felt when he grew up he was abandoned by his father, although he was not really abandoned by his father, but it was not a warm relationship. He grew up in a school for the blind, which was 2,000 miles away from his house until he was 17, so from the age of 6. So Shep had different issues than Isaac. Isaac grew up in a much warmer environment in Israel, and he always, since his bar mitzvah, he knew Ida. Ida found him before his bar mitzvah and came to see him, and they were in touch all the years, Ida and Shep. Ida and Isaac. So he knew Ida, and he was very excited to meet Shep, but it wasn't existential, as he said. He was very curious to know who his father was, and he wanted to know if it was Grisha and all that. And Ida, I think, she was very emotional, but you didn't see through her. She's a very tough Polish lady. She's 89 years old, so she's not totally demented, but she was sometimes got tired, and so we filmed in the morning. She was fresh and remembered everything, and later on she got. I think that's part of the issue also, dementia, and also I think she was very guilty. She knew she hid. She basically had 2 kids, left one of them and never was in touch with them again, Shep, because he was with the father. And with Isaac, she was in touch, but she never told him the truth. She always tried to build for Isaac this false identity to protect him. She said she was Jewish from birth, which wasn't true. We only found out in the film. Because she understood that in order for him to feel comfortable in Israel, he needs to believe that he's totally Jewish, etc. So I think when we suddenly came with her 2 sons, it was shocking for her in the beginning. She was very happy. We used to come with the cameras in the morning, and she said, "Oh, I love your cameras," and hug us and kiss. She was very warm. Again, in the movie we cut it very dramatically, but she was very, very nice old lady. I really liked her, but she was also tough. She's been through a lot, and she stayed the mother and she stayed strong in front of the camera when we were having the conversations with People get very, very emotional in this film. I mean, it's not a Holocaust film. It's a film about love, about lies, about hidden identities, about a mother protecting her kids and giving up a huge sacrifice for doing that. And I think, and for me, when we made the film, I tried for it to be almost like a mystery detective story. Because you saw the film, you're on the edge of your seat all the time. You get very emotional in the first half hour, but then it becomes a crazy detective story with the surprises until the last moment, which we won't tell. But,
absolutely. Just one more question. For people who want to do their own kind of research, what sort of documents did you look at?
If we're talking about research on post-World War II, the biggest archive in the world that you would want to talk to is ITS, the International Tracing Service. It's in Bad Arolsen in Germany. They are the source of all that documentation. There's partial copies of these millions of documents in Yad Vashem in Israel, in the Washington Holocaust Museum, but my recommendation is if you want to do deep research, at some point you can be directly in touch with the ITS. They're amazing. They don't have a lot of budget. It takes time, but they are very thorough and very German, and they do a good job. Then, and this is getting very specific, if you're looking at Bergen-Belsen specifically, in other camps, there's a wonderful archive in New York, which is the Joints Archive, and there's a couple of archives on 16th Street. This is the one roof with many Jewish archives, YIVO and others, and that's where you find the more personal records of cards of people coming in, etc. So that's the second place you could look at. And specifically for Bergen-Belsen DP camp, there's the NIOD institution in Amsterdam, which is like Yad Vashem for the Dutch Yad Vashem. And they happen to have this album by Zippy Orland, which is the biggest documentation with photographs of these 3-4 years after the war.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm Judy Gelman Myers, and I've been speaking with Alon Schwarz, director of the amazing film AIDA'S Secret. Thanks for joining us.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, WWII or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.